believe we are live now. Okay, so this is my plan. Yeah, I think we'll do that tomorrow. We'll do it on Teams. So will you have a laptop tomorrow? Everyone have a laptop tomorrow? You should have, okay. So I'll just turn on, we'll have Teams. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have everybody else get on Teams too. So everyone in class. So those of you who are online, and I'll post it again, you have to check in online on Teams tomorrow at, let's make them come in at 6 a.m. Everybody else come in at about, the class begins at 12:19, so quarter after 12, I'll open up Teams. So everybody will be there, so you guys will just take it. We'll all do it on Teams, and it's going to be, I put the list out on Teams, so the list has been there for the test. And I'll give you a copy of the list. I'm going to ask very basic questions from the list, wherever I hit it. And then how come I just have one? All of you get to look at the one copy of the list I made. If they have an asterisk, I mentioned this yesterday in class. I mentioned it online. We're going to do short IDs. And some of you already know what short IDs are. I think it's a great way. It's one of the best ways I know to do a question. So, for a few of them, those with asterisks on there, those will be choices for short IDs. You do not have to answer all of them all. I'm thinking like 3 or 4. And the rest of you just don't answer. But you must explain what it is. So it's 3 to 4 sentences. Explain what it is. And that includes like where and when, some basic information about it. Then give an example of it. So give an example. So I mentioned irrigation, talk something about irrigation. Like the dams or the irrigation of the Tigris or Euphrates River. I'm just throwing out an example. And then you have to explain why it's important. And that means the last sentence, what it led to. So like irrigation led directly to the surplus of food, which allowed for the creation of civilizations because they could start specializing labor. Does that sound familiar? And so it's those 3 to 4 sentences. And those for the turns with asterisks. I'll have these choices on there, and then you pick. I've decided between 3 or 4. So it's a short essays. It's a great way for you to write a little bit more than just simply yes/no answers. So you write what you know. And it also allows me to have you write what you know on a broad variety of topics. Instead of like an essay is focused relatively narrow, we do a lot of different things. So I really like doing that, and they're perfect for a class like this. And then the rest of the ones will be fodder for potential multiple choice, or true and false. And they're going to be really very basic true and false, just basic knowledge about the other ones. Not all of them, I'll choose some, but all we've covered in some way in class. Sounds good? Yes?
What would you want from money and trade?
Money. The big thing about money and trade is how, I was thinking in terms of money as in how it started with gold as a placeholder and how it became valuable so you can collect taxes at first to pay soldiers. And then foreign merchants merchants had to get paid in money. And then once you have that system set up like, okay, we will accept this placeholder, gold, for money, then that would facilitate trade. Because now it became easier to trade because you could trade and get dollars in return instead of debt. Did I put down debt? Okay, I can't forget to mention debt jubilees. It just hit my mind. Some of you might know what a debt jubilee is. We don't have such things. Might have to. Any other questions real fast? Yes? Ramses II of Egypt. And she's just talk about how this is the great building projects. And even though this is considered the height of Egyptian culture, he was
a liar, right?
Oh, complete liar.
Okay.
Great propagandist. He got his point of view out. He hit about the Battle of Kadesh. The idea of not sending reconnaissance around the other side of the city to miss an entire army of like 3,000 men is beyond my ability to comprehend. If you read the ancient, Ramses said he had like 30,000 men, and the Hittites had hundreds of thousands, but it's probably 3,000 and 4,000. You know, they always lied about the numbers.
There weren't that many people back then.
Especially not enough men.
Yeah.
And even though, don't think in terms of a standing army, they were mostly just, here's a pike, let's go. But some were standing army. Where'd you feed them? You have that many men together, which is always a problem with armies. Any other questions? Anything on this? It's going to be really pretty basic. Sound fun? So make sure you have a laptop. The other questions, the multiple choice, I'm not going to make them that complex. They're going to be mostly what I talked about in class, but pretty basic. And I can almost guarantee there'll be something about geography and domesticated animals from Gun, Germs, and Steel. There'll be a few things about the pyramids, and like I have Khufu and I have the old pyramids in Neferu. I might ask just a generic question about pyramids, give an example. That's what I'm looking for. And pyramids, actually the big deal about pyramids, we'll get to it today. One of the big outcomes of pyramids that you don't even think about, but it would be huge. Let's go to get started anytime we'll review. The plan is then tomorrow, have your laptop, everybody else check in. If things don't work out like that, have you guys done that in another class? Is that where you came? Like, have you done it in another class? How have you guys done tests yet? Has anyone? Yeah.
So, in math, we just tend to have like a quiz. We haven't done a big test yet, but we have quizzes on Wednesdays, so everyone's virtual, and then it's just over, like he sends us the form. We
Gives us
have
the
to,
PDF to
write on it, get a signature that we didn't cheat.
What class is this in?
Mr. Peterson's math.
Yeah.
It's calculus. In another class, we're doing live compute.
Yeah, the problem is some people, I know there's like 3 or 4 students in my class who don't have a printer.
I think the forms works really well and worked pretty well last year.
So what we're going to do is, then everybody, don't have your microphones on, but I want you to turn your cameras on. Because we want to watch you. I want to watch you, and then we can, and you can see us, and it'll be scary. I'm with the camera on you. No, everybody else home.
I was like, why do we need to have our camera?
So this is what we'll do it. That's kind of a hybrid of that, and we'll have to worry about printing it out. The forms will work. This, yes, you can be writing, you have to know your material, but this is not the same as an honors class or an AP class, so that's what we'll do. That's how it works. If things don't work, I'll blame you, and your grades will suffer. That's fair. All right, so let's get to the Phoenicians. If I don't finish this today, we might have to move the test to Monday, but I don't think you'll mind, will you? Then Monday, you guys will be at home. Does that make sense?
The tables have turned.
So, we'll talk a little bit about Phoenicia and Phoenician cities. I love the great atrium here. That is so cool. That's Tyre on the coast of Lebanon, which I really would love to go to. But you'll see this used in movies, especially like for fake cities. It's really a cool effect. Yeah.
Is this like a news heading that I need to read it?
Yeah, it's new heading. So we finished ancient Egypt, and it was hard to do that. I want to talk about more, but I realized no, we have to get certain parts of it because we have to get to Greece. But the Phoenician world, and so one thing about the Phoenician world was this was still when it had its height. It just started at the beginning of the Bronze Age, and so the Bronze Age it spread. This is how it spread eventually through Europe, and that was. So remember, bronze is copper with a little bit of tin, much stronger material, but not near as strong as iron. But what triggered this is the end of the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age. And so, once again, we do got to mention the Hittites. So the Hittites, which had their peak about 1300 BC. You notice I didn't put BC out there. Do you have your notebook or? Yeah. I've been to Rockaway Beach. That's a pretty cool place. Should we go? Would you rather go to Rockaway Beach in Oregon or the Pyramids of Giza?
Giza.
Make a round trip.
So, the Hittites here, and I know we've mentioned it before, because the Hittites are always like this constant. There's the Hittites. And the Hittites had massive bug eyes. But, no, I like this one. What's that? That's the corn from wheat. So, one thing about the Hittites, when they came coming into this area from the steppes of what is now Russia and Georgia and Armenia, they're called Indo-Europeans, and their languages would be the form languages I mentioned before of almost all European languages, including English. And one thing about the Hittites too we have to mention is, much like the Phoenicians, that's why they're a good place to start with the Phoenicians, is this was a blended culture. They just kind of absorbed the cultures of the areas they came into as they swept in on horseback and then would adopt chariots. And they had a very organized government. They used gold. We've talked about the importance of gold before. And lastly, as we mentioned before, they were the first ones to do iron. Now, I just mentioned this before when we were talking about Assyria. But iron would be key. They would trigger the Iron Age, and this would directly lead to the Phoenicians, who would radically alter the course of history. And because of iron, their chariots and their infantry were the best. Iron armor, iron blades, chainmail made from iron would be almost, in fact, oh boy. The storm is coming through. Darn it. I was kind of hoping to say relatively warm. I want to do. Here is, that's a iron relief. That's a pretty cool picture of the chariot. And they're working. We got people watching. Good. So that's the iron chair or iron relief. It's basically on a big bowl or cauldron. Here is Hittite infantry. And they would dominate the Mideast. And there's this concept, the Hittites. And like people mention them all the time and no one really knows who they are. And that would be the expansion of the Hittite Empire. And you notice this whole area would be empires all the time. That's why I set this map to give you an idea. You know, the Fertile Crescent, always fighting over that region. And exploiting it and ruining it. But back to the Iron Age. Here's Hittite sword. That's Hittite body armor. Can you see the front chest plate? And Hittite spear points. That's a belt buckle. Or something the equivalent of a belt buckle. Why? I have no idea how I did that. The coming in. I mean, I know how to do it, but I don't normally like it, but I must have actually hit the wrong little button up top. And so, the Iron Age, just the big thing about the Iron Age, 1200 to 700 BC. And this would revolutionize trade, commerce, would radically alter the course of history. Once you had iron, they could mass produce things like a relative of the Hittites, the Lydians could produce the coins. This is one thing we kind of overlap some of the history. We talked about some of this when we talked about the Sumerians and the Persians and once they made a lot more iron than any. Oh, I'm sorry. There was a lot more iron in the ground. Iron was easier to mine than copper. There was a lot more out there. It was a lot stronger. So they smelted it first with a process called oxidization. And you probably know what that means. But iron has to get up to over 1,000 degrees for it to be melted. That means you need not only a very hot fire, it needs to be enclosed in what's going to be called a furnace, and you have to be able to blow oxygen in there. And so the first thing I'm going to show you on the left will be just kind of a generic furnace. But the other one is a Hittite drawing oven. It's really cool. So this is iron. It looks like a sheath. No, it looks like some copper on there, doesn't it? And then that looks like gold. But the sword is iron. That'd be a pretty neat thing to see. Yeah.
How long is that?
About 3 feet.
Or what is it? The whole thing?
Yeah.
It just looks like it might have been like more of a dagger.
Yeah, it looks really small, but the handles were just different, so we used the smaller handles. So this is a very generic one. Here is the furnace, and the charcoal that with its superheat and coal works much better for this. But the big thing is you have to have some kind of opening here where they could blow air in. And look at this one. You see it? They're literally blowing the air into the furnace. That's a Hittite carving to superheat it to make iron. And once they did this, they had an advantage over other countries, not just militarily, but when the Phoenicians are right next door, what's going to become the Phoenicians, that would give them huge advantages commercially, trade. So that's why we had to go through a little more detail of the Hittites. And once that happened, once the Hittites got iron, they began to conquer into here, and that's part of the reason why they're able to push Ramses back, even though there are significantly more Egyptians. They pushed the Assyrians back and helped lead to the end of that empire, and have influence on the early Greeks. And that would help trigger basically a destruction of the first Greek kingdoms when the Iron Age hit. All these things happen at once. And then what happened? Here come the invaders into Egypt. So, very quickly, let's get to the Phoenicians then. So the Phoenicians lived in this area. I don't know why I put the map so far away. What is now Lebanon, Syria, into Egypt. Farming was very difficult there. They're near the coast, very rocky, hilly, dry. They could farm, but a lot of it has been farmed out. So beginning around 1000 BC, they began to become more involved in trade. And because of that, using the iron from the Hittites, they would become a great seafaring people. And even though it says Phoenicia, it's more like city-states. And so the big ones would be Tripolis, Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre is the one that is the one would become the most important of the Phoenician city-states. In the Middle Ages, it would be a big fortified city. That in Accra, there'd be crusader castles there, which still remain. It'd be like, I guess it's just an amazing place to go. We can't go anywhere, but just imagine. I didn't want that. So, 1100 BC, the Phoenicians, Iron Age hit, they become major traders. And just a second. Okay, back. I'm sorry about that. And one product they had that they had been synthesizing, so to speak, for 500 years was a dye. And this dye was from the Murex snail. So here are the snails. Here's an older one of the shells of it. And you can see this smudge. So inside the shell, they literally just crush it. There'd be this yellowish ink, just a little drop of it. But once it's exposed to light, it turns purple. And that would become their most valuable commodity. This dye would soon be called the royal purple and would become the color of royalty. That's one of the reasons why in colonial America, when they have found indigo and beating indigo on a rock and they formed this stinky purple smudge that is sold as a dye, that would make South Carolina colony. Also bring a lot of slaves and bring to racism and a lot of other things, but purple became the sign of wealth and royalty. And so here is supposedly a picture of people giving up anything to get the purple dye from Phoenician traders. And here's the smudge dye. This is a massive slaughter of snails, clearly.
Where'd they get the snails? They just go out and pick them up?
Yeah.
Or do they farm them?
You know, they would gather them,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would let them live. You know, they would try to gather them in that swampy area. And so I guess it's kind of like domestication, but it's more like just let them breed there and then just pick them up, or just go out and get them. I guess in every swamp they'd just be covered with them. They're almost gone now.
What is PE?
Pounds.
Oh.
Should that be L?
Yeah, I don't know why I put PD. 1 pound of dye. Yeah, I don't know why I put PD. You're right, it should be LBS. There, I feel better now. Okay, so. Now, iron was obviously important, but another one is they were the first to really do the mass glass blowing. And these are Phoenician vases. And look how elaborate they are. They're about this tall. So we're talking 3 feet high. They're beautiful. And you notice how they inject the dye in? And one thing about it I did not write down. I should have, but I didn't. Once you have these, it became easier to ship things, because we'll mention it more, it becomes the Greeks, because the Greeks would be greatly influenced by this. Olive oil and wine. Glass and wine and olive oil go hand in hand because it became a place to store it, and pottery it wasn't quite as good for the wine. Mm-hmm.
Alright. Do any of those still exist today that they made?
Hmm?
Do any of the glass blowing things exist today that they made?
These are it. These are from that time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how? Are they in museums?
Yeah, as far as now, this one's in a museum in Athens.
Okay.
But I've seen smaller versions, like this big, in the British Museum in London.
I'm just thinking how much would those cost nowadays?
Oh, yeah, incalculable.
Exactly.
And that's why looters would steal them, steal them and sell them for a profit to wealthy people or collectors. Here's glass blowing. The Egyptians did glass blowing too, but not to the extent that the Phoenicians did. By the way, how do you glass blow? What do you get glass from?
Sand.
Yeah, superheat sand. And sand begins to stick together. And then as soon as it begins to crystallize, you blow through and be very careful not to suck in.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, think about that for a second. But you kind of stumble across it. It was from making the ceramics where they came up with that. And that's why there were no trees in England by 1600s. They had so much glass. They were trying to make it glass so fast. Yeah.
Why do they look like they're smoking speech?
I know. Doesn't it look like there's smoke in
like
there?
Some sort of ceremony.
Like a hookah pipe, yeah.
Exactly.
And so wine, so those are the two big things. But I just want to add wine, and even though we'll talk more about wine and olive oil when we get to Greece and Rome. But also, they too developed their own alphabet. And they narrowed it down to only 22 symbols, so it's smaller than cuneiform. And this would be the basis of the Latin alphabet, or you look at your letters, your alphabet. And you can see it here. So, the early pictographs, hieroglyphics, Phoenician, early Greek, Latin. Out of Latin would come the letters of English today. And it comes from Phoenicia. So, if you're going to be trading, you need to keep records, you need to record this, you need bills of sale. Whenever you have merchants dealing with each other, you're going to need lawyers. I think you know where this is going. And the Phoenicians did it. And you combine that where now they have these great trading goods, they could put this on papyrus. Where do you get the papyrus from? Egypt. And they would form this great trading network, yeah.
So were they sort of profitable enough and strong enough that no one conquered them, but they were able to stay small and independent?
For a while. But eventually they'd be picked apart. Because they're relatively small. So when the Babylonians came in, they would be mostly conquered by the Babylonians. And then the Persians. And then the Greeks. And so their time would be relatively small, but they're not going to be isolated here. Once they start trading, they got this huge Mediterranean in front of them. And they can go anywhere. Yeah, the Phoenicians they're an incredible people. I guess, and brave. I mean, think about it. I'm going to go across the Mediterranean. You know, I'm sometimes scared to cross the street. Yes?
So at this point in time, around 900 BC, how far have people spread out across the globe? Had they already crossed the land bridge?
Oh, yeah. They're all over.
Okay, so it's very...
Every place where people would get to, they made it by then.
Okay.
There were still a few islands in the Pacific where there were still people we call the Polynesians going, but for the most part, they had made it by then too.
Okay.
And yeah, all the Americas, it took about 1,000 years to cover or even less than that. Australia by then. Yeah.
I'm confused how I went from that to like a Z, then to an I. That's so weird. I don't know why they wouldn't have just like, unless it's not.
Oh, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it starts out like a kind of like an H, and then it goes to a Z, and then it goes to like I.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that don't really make sense, do they? And they just got
Why
rid
are
of.
they sideways.
Yeah, it must be turn it over, but then it.
It's like a little lightning.
I almost wonder if that's why we sometimes do eyes with like the top and the bottom to them instead of just a straight line.
I love how head of a man became R. Isn't that great? Man calling turned into E.
Oh,
A is the most common letter.
Ox head, hey. Yeah, there's some, they don't really make sense. Some you can see a clear line. I guess snake, N,
Yeah.
that's easy. P's a little bit odd. But that's where it all starts. So the Phoenicians had great influence. Why? Well, as they spread across, you can see how the alphabet, in the form of letters, they actually threw them across the Mediterranean to Greece. Well, they're trading with Greece. And that's how the Greeks would make their alphabet. They're trading with Italy. In fact, their trade networks were all over this area. And so the Minoan civilization in Crete, which would be the first flowering of Greek civilization right here, part of the reason they had their flowering was the first connection with the Phoenicians and the Hittites. It also helped lead to their disaster too, that and a volcano. But look at all the trade routes. So here are the generic alphabet thing, I put that up there again. But soon they're trading all the way across the Mediterranean. They're trading with the Egyptians, and they're eventually going into the Atlantic. Not only that, at first they did indirect trade routes through Egypt, but pretty soon across the Suez, and they're into the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and they're trading as far as India. Remarkable people. Courage. But also, I guess, if the unknown is all you know, you go with it. It's just, that's the way it is. In fact, I think I have one more picture of this. And as they started spreading out, they started making colonies. They put colonies all along the north coast of Africa. The biggest one would be Carthage. And eventually Carthage would become their own empire, and their wars with Rome would be basically a war for the Mediterranean called the Punic Wars.
They were like huge, weren't they?
Have you heard of Hannibal? Hannibal was from Carthage. And we'll watch something on Hannibal. It's a great story. I mean, there are signs of Phoenician settlement down the coast of Africa and up into Britain. So the Phoenicians went everywhere. So the courage to set up a colony, and they had great influence and trade, and some have argued Ionia, right here, which is this is Greek, and everyone said they're Greek cities right here. But there's a belief that it was a kind of a hybrid Phoenician Greek, and that could have been how the alphabet was spread. And the reason we got to mention that is because that is going to lead when we come back to the pyramid. That's a great etching of a Phoenician sheep.
They had some weird sheeps back then.
Yes.
So the Phoenicians were pretty much like, yeah, you guys go and fight for this land over here. We're just going to go out into the Mediterranean and
Yeah.
take all the other land.
Yeah, this
You
is
have
too.
fun. You have fun there.
Now, eventually, these guys will come take it. But yeah, they're looking at it. We have an ability to make money, trade, gold, increase our power. And since we can't settle that way, we'll settle this way. And they were developers in, some of the key developers in navigation. And the way they would navigate, well, first off, before we get to anything else, before you write down geometry and triangles, let me get one thing really clear. How do they navigate?
Stars.
They stayed next to the coast. You know, they never really went too far away from the coast. And one more thing about the Mediterranean. Which way does the wind blow? 6 months of the year it blows this way. 6 months of the year it blows this way.
Really?
Yeah. So what do?
You sail with the wind.
You go this way one part of the year, you go this way the other way, or you roll. Their sails were just, they did have sails, and sails had been around for 1,000, or for almost 5,000 years, but they're just a big square, a square piece of cloth that would be, that's why it was such a big deal to get the loom in Egypt, so that you can make a square cloth. They did not have diagonal sails called lateen sails that you could tack into the wind for another, get my years right, 2,000 years. But they navigated another way. This was so crucial. They did it from learning from the Greeks. And they did it with, oh, this is a Phoenician symbol of the shoreline, and then the skyline and the sky, sea out in front, an early navigational map. Yeah.
Flatter. Flatter. You got the bottom there, and you have the dome of the sky over that.
Flat Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, they knew it was round, but they just assumed there were things holding the sun up. Later on, they'd say it's glass. Big glass spheres that the moon would go around and the sun would go around. Obviously. Which would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, let's say there's a shoreline. And this came from the pyramids and Thales, of Ionia, the connection here. So this is a coastline. Does that look like a coastline?
Yes.
And the most generic way is they did it with triangles. So you have a pyramid. You know, imagine a pyramid like that, but 4 sides. And how to make that pyramid? They took for Egyptian geometry, trade, right? They're trading with it. What do we know about one side of a triangle? Or what do we know about, about the angles inside the triangle? What degrees do they make?
180.
That's 180, isn't it? And so we know, or they knew, if they could get the measurement of 2 angles, of 2 spots, have a guy standing here and a guy standing here. They know this distance. Does that make sense? Here comes a ship going by. Ship! Yeah, pretty good ship, huh? Here's oars. At the exact same time, they put basically the precursor to this right here. And I'll show you some Greek ones. The precursor to a sextant or an astrolabe. They set that on there on a stick, and they measure a straight line here, and then they can measure these 2 angles. And once they have that, what can you figure out? What's that? So you figure out the angles for here, and can't you figure out the distance to the shore now? Once you have that, you can figure out the distance from here to here. Once you figure out the triangles, and you know the length of this side. If you remember geometry, you probably did this.
Would they have set distances between the markers?
Yeah, that's what they would do.
Okay.
They would set that distance. It worked better. Let me show you a diagram from this time. Oh, we're not going to finish. I got good news for everybody. Listen carefully. I'm moving the test to Monday. So where are you guys going to be on Monday? At 12:15.
Here.
But you're not going to be here.
Probably in Bed-Stuy.
On team, sound good to everybody? Sound good? Let me show you this last picture. Hey, this is really interesting. I think this is just fascinating stuff. Because it should, I got one more thing to add. We're not quite done yet. I never quit at the bell. I keep going. It works better if you have these 2 points and another point. So you can figure out like this, so you get the right angles. Right angles are easier to figure out the distance. Because once you know this, these 2 angles are the same, these 2 angles are the same, and you come up with a more accurate measurement. But using geometry is how they were able to do navigation. So they could tell how far they were from the shore, and so you can do the same thing on board a ship did. Once you have certain spots, they would put markers on the shore so the ships could do it. And then they could tell where the sandbar is. They could tell where an island is. They could tell where they won't get grounded. And that would be a revolutionary design, and Thales of Ionia would put this down in math in 500 BC and would revolutionize the world. He would put this down. This would be the basis of, if you like Euclidean geometry, it comes from here. And they invented the new ship. Last thing, the trireme. And that would be the first, they use them as warships. They could go in the, if it's not windy, and they have 3 lines of oars. Who rowed them? People trying to get into shape, yeah. AKA slaves. Yeah.
They have giant iron rams on the front.
Sure. So, or, the belly rubber ram, but I'll start right here. I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah, they have iron rams here, and the ram would go under the water. Because the best weapon would be to ram. You go into the enemy ship and then have your men on top mount or board the other ship. The Romans would eventually put this big claw hammer that would come down and connect the two. There, it's crazy. Yeah.
Wasn't that a lot of the big naval battles in between Carthage and Rome?
Yes. Huge naval battle. Yeah. And there's like a huge naval battle. One of the most famous ones is acting Romans against Romans. One of the biggest naval battles in history. One of their civil wars. So I'm sorry I didn't quite get the test. I will change it online, but the test will be Monday. Because we can talk a little bit about Hebrews. And once that happened, and there's stuff I'm not telling you about the Phoenicians. We can only cover so much, but this is really, I think, fascinating stuff.
Like you can do an entire class on any one of these things.
Yeah. And the Greeks were just going to have to literally pick and choose. We will have to decide if I want to show. So I have Engineering Empire for the Carthage, I'm not going to show, and a few others, but for Rome and Greece too.
Do we have, are we going to talk about...
See you tomorrow.
Genghis Khan at all?
Just on the periphery. We will talk a little bit about Spartacus.
Wasn't that one of the biggest land, apart from Britain, but like the biggest land empire in history?
Who? Genghis Khan?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It spread basically from
The Pacific to the Mediterranean.
his son got more to the Pacific, but pretty close to the Pacific, all the way into here.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So in class.
Well, have fun with that.
Where you going?
I know.
It's really bad.
What's that?
It's really bad. So it's terrible because of the pandemic. But we're going to deploy. So.
I understand. You gotta have something to do that.
And I technically.
Please be careful.
Yeah, I know. And I don't really. I keep telling mom I don't want to go, but
Yeah.
so.
I'm sorry.
So,
Yes. Thomas Jefferson.
I definitely...
Flag.
That's totally fine.
Right? I think I am gonna, even though the weather is kind of horrible,
You're
I'm
here.
still gonna
Pass
go
out
to the
twice so far.
meeting for science club right after school.
It is so cold in
I think
here.
I might run for the period and get a better jacket. Are you gonna stay for the meeting, or do you want me to go?
Oh, great.
Yeah, I can do that.
You know, we
See you after
finally made
school.
it through. Oh, I'm recording this.
There is no classroom that is colder than this. Your classroom is so cold.
Is this
I
why?
mean, it's like a nice cold though.
Were you getting too hot? You're at
Oh
home.
my gosh.
Just too warm and had to get out of
I
there.
know.